Hi, this is Link, and I'd like to make a video on I want to say the doctrine of of Nicolaitanism, but that's kind of not exactly what the doctrine of the Nicolaitans is in Scripture. So I'd like to ask the question: Is Nicolaitan, does that refer to clergy? Now, if you look in Revelation 2:15. It says, "Thus you have those who hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Repent, or else I will come to you quickly and fight against them with the sword of my mouth." Now, in some writings, and this is common among the Plymouth Brethren groups, I think they've popularized it more than anyone else. From there, it went into the local church movement and Watchman Nee's writings in China. And from those two sources, perhaps, and other sources that drew from there, it bled into house church movement teachings. House churches typically believe in meetings where believers speak and edify the body, and well, there are many different types of house churches. The movement I'm talking about believes this, and some of them emphasize having a plurality of elders, and some have a looser idea of elders. Actually, as far as I've been able to trace this back, the idea goes back to, I believe it was in Eureka, which is a Christadelphian writing. Not saying I endorse that, but actually the way they argued it, that document argued it, was pretty slick, was pretty convincing. But I'm not convinced that's what the passage is talking about. And anyway, what people say the passage is talking about from the Brethren writings, as far as I believe that's where that came from. That Nicolaitan means, Nico means conquering, and Laitan means the people. That they say it means people who conquered the laity, or those who conquered the laity, and therefore it's the clergy. Of course, if you look up the history of the word laity, it means people. It doesn't mean lay people as opposed to clergy at this time. And the word for clergy didn't mean clergy. The Greek word from which we get clergy didn't mean clergy either back then. Either one could apply to Christians, applies to people. And now you got to be careful. This is a kind of arguing doctrine based on folk etymology. Oh, the roots of the word mean this, and then you add a few assumptions, and then you come out with the meaning of it. Well, Phineas in the Old Testament, he was one of the descendants of Aaron, and he was a very zealous priest for the Lord. And when the Midianites, actually, I'm going to talk about this Midianite problem. The Midianites and was it one of the other Balak? Well, Midianites and another group, Moabites was it, hired Balaam to come and curse Israel, and he said, "I only say what the Lord tells me to say." And he loved the money though, and he went to curse them, but he prophesied blessings over them. But he still helped Israel's enemies, and the way he did that was he had this plot. Okay, Israel is only protected by God and blessed by God if they're faithful to God. So we need to get them to commit idolatry. So what we did, so they came up with this plot where they were going to have these idolatrous festivals and send these pretty young women, or I don't know how pretty they were, but they send these women to the Israelites to fornicate with them and entice them to commit idolatry and sexual immorality. So the thing with when that was happening, Phineas took a spear, or the people were pinning before God because they were being punished because of their idolatry and their fornication. And when they were repenting before God, a guy brings this woman, I believe it was a Midianite woman, into his tent, and you can imagine what they're doing, probably laying down on the ground. And it says that Phineas took a spear and he stuck it through both of them, I suppose while they're in the act. And because of his zeal, God was pleased with that and gave him the priesthood. You know what Phineas's name means? Snake's mouth. Well, you could come up with all kinds of esoteric meanings about what snake's mouth means, but I don't think that's the point of the story. It has anything to do with the snake's mouth. I could come up with all kinds of bizarre doctrines based on that. And you could come up with bizarre doctrines based on the word Nicolaitan, especially if you use the definition of Laitan or laity that we use nowadays and not what it meant in ancient Greek. Now, let's read verses 14 and 15. "But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold to the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality." I'm using New King James today. "Thus you also have those who hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Now notice the thus. There's a connection between the Nicolaitans and those who hold to the doctrine of Balaam. Now there are Greek groups around this time and after, at least we know about, that believed that matter was evil and that we were trying to be spiritual, and one variety of it was whatever you do with your body doesn't matter, as long what matters is your spirit, and they didn't care about fornication, and you could commit idolatry because it was done with the body, and that was all okay to them. And the Jezebel, that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, was teaching the people, seducing the Lord's servants to commit sexual immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. So this was a common thing. This is what Balaam was doing. The people following the doctrine of Balaam, who Jude also mentions Balaam in connection to money, or something that seemed to indicate greed. So anyway, these are the problems that they were dealing with in the church, and there's a connection here between those who held to the doctrine of Balaam and the Nicolaitan group. Thus, you also have those who hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. Let's see, block before the children of Israel to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. Thus, you have, and also the King James says, likewise, you have those who, if I'm not mistaken, likewise, you have those who hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Now, the ancient traditions of the church is that somehow this Nicolaitans were named after one of the seven, and the guys appointed to feed the widows in Acts, and that he, in order to prove that he wasn't jealous, he offered his wife to everyone. Nobody took him up on it, just to show that he was jealous, and that he said something about abusing the flesh in a sense of meaning keeping your body under submission, and that these guys took his name and named their sect after it, and that he didn't teach this, but they were teaching people to commit sexual immorality. Eusebius records a tradition. I don't recall exactly where he got that tradition from. He wrote in the 4th century about the traditional ideas about what these groups were. It may not, it's 300 or 400 years out, but it's a lot closer than somebody in the 16 or 1700s, whenever the Christadelphians came up with this, or the Brethren movement, using folk etymology to say that the Nicolaitans are really anybody who's a clergyman. And I can understand why the Brethren movement would go for that. And I certainly am closer to the Brethren movement's idea of church leadership than I am to some Episcopal idea of church leadership. In the Bible, you have different kinds of leadership. You have your apostles who would go out and plant churches, and they would have a sphere of authority or a measure of rule, according to 2 Corinthians 10, in the areas where they introduced the gospel. At least the group that went out, not the Jerusalem group's a little bit different story. And they would have a measure of rule, and they would go back to congregations and help keep them in order, write letters to them. And over a period of time, at first they left the churches with no ordained leadership there, no pointed out leadership. And then they would come back and they would appoint these elders who were homegrown leaders from within the congregation, who knew the congregation, who were a part of it, matured up within the congregation. They were mature men. The word for elders means older man or senior man. They were mature, and they were spiritually mature men. They lived a certain lifestyle. Their qualification was not they went off to Bible college. They're not young kids who are wet behind the ears and just went to have a degree or have an education. They're not people who say, "Oh, I'm called, therefore I'm an elder." It does say if a man desires to be an elder, an overseer, he desires a good work. So we got these elder overseers. There's more than one of them in a local church. So yes, that's the biblical model. And if you want to argue against it, use the scriptures about what church leadership was like in the New Testament. We don't have to go doing folk etymology and get something that's really weak and make this really condemning doctrine that puts them right here with the idolaters and the people who commit sexual immorality, the people who eat meat offered to idols and go down to the idol's temple. So we have to be really careful with this kind of thing, because you can end up, you find something wrong, and then I can see how in the 1800s, if you had a plural eldership church and everybody else had bishops and in the traditional sense, that you would be like, wow, that's so wrong, and you'd really be combing through the Bible trying to find more and more evidence to argue against it and make it the pivotal doctrine upon all which, talk about pivotal doctrines. The Seventh-day Adventists, some of them will say that the mark of the beast is not is the Sunday Sabbath. That's just the you get this one doctrine and you interpret so many things in the Bible through it. And we need to be careful about that when it comes to church. We need to keep balance in our doctrine when it comes to church leadership. Yes, plural eldership is biblical. The way ministries are set up with a one-man pastor system or the one-man bishop, that's not what's taught in the New Testament. Now, some people will say that our senior pastor and our junior pastor and our assistant and associate pastors, they're elders and all this kind of stuff. And maybe they may be operating in that role, but that's really not specifically what we see taught in the New Testament. So thank you very much for watching this video. If this has been a blessing to you, or you know somebody this could be a blessing to, please send the link to someone else. Thanks a lot.